Welcome to the program. We're so glad you joined us. This is one of the most beautiful days. I was outside
it's spring and it's gorgeous. Yeah.
I loved having lunch outside.
I
and
know.
just the so it's not hot yet, but it's warm.
Yeah.
The sky is blue. The grass is coming back green.
So we were like, let's do a podcast.
let's get inside, locked down. But it is. There is something awesome about just the warmer weather, wearing short sleeve shirts and all of that, getting outside, soon getting the pool ready.
The biggest pain about doing the video thing, which I don't mind doing, it's fine, is that I'm like, I have to not look like, total crap. Like I have to do something. You
never look like.
I don't know.
Good.
I just feel a little bit more like responsible. I'm like, who cares? Just throw it out there. Messy family project, right?
Well, we've been doing this full time as a ministry. We're in our 5th year. And
it's hard to believe.
I can't believe it's been that long in some ways.
I can't either.
But knowing that we're on episode 238, right?
Yeah.
We've got a couple of episodes here. And so there are some topics that we touch on again and again, but there's also some things that come up in the season. And one of the things that's coming up right now is the Play and Pray Challenge.
Oh my gosh, yes.
And,
Play and Pray Challenge is so close to my heart because devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus is something that my grandmother had when she was raising her family in an Italian community in Manhattan and Greenwich Village, and passed on to my mother and then passed on to us. And then you came to devotion to the Sacred Heart of Jesus
right when I was a teenager.
Own.
And I brought it to my family.
Yeah.
Which was kind of fun as a teenager.
So the Play and Pray Challenge is a time really to encourage people to enthrone Jesus Christ, make Jesus Christ the king of their home.
Because if you want to play with your kids, you need to if you want to pray with your kids, what I mean, right? If you want to play,
to promote that happening, we recognize that if you're gonna pray with your kids for 10 minutes, that means you need to play with your kids for like 90 minutes.
and we want to fill you up as the summer begins with your marriage getting the center of attention, if you will, getting your family united in some fun and some play and some great activity, and then whether it's renewing or it's for the first time, making Christ the king of your home.
Because if you want to pray with your kids, you need to play with your kids. So we can be taught. So really, if you're interested in doing this challenge, first of all, do it with friends. Get a group of people together to do it. Second of all, sign up on our website. Go to our website.
We would love to know just because we want to see who's doing it across the country.
Yeah.
And we also have a free resource download for you.
Yeah. And if maybe you have the download from before, but still come and sign up on the website so we know you're doing it. So we know it encourages us.
Every year we update.
When we see hundreds or thousands of people who are doing this, it's also something you can promote in your parish. So this is May right now, but it's ideally this would be something that would be done during the month of the Sacred Heart, which is June. And we have flyers and handouts and a little booklet, all kinds of things. It's such an easy thing to promote in your parish, and it is a free program.
And we do ask priests every year to pray for the families who sign up. Right. So we submit your names to a number of priests who have agreed to say Mass.
Our messy family
for the intentions of your family. So sign up, and it's all free. And we just want to encourage you to start the summer right.
And if you have a priest that you know who loves families, have them throw us an email or sign up to be a priest. And if a priest is like, hey, I will offer Mass for all the messy families who are doing this, oh gosh, please let us know, because we want to list those names and thank those priests for loving us, loving us families.
And thinking of play, we alluded to it last time, but we want to officially announce that we are having our 2nd annual Catholic Couples Getaway. We went to Cozumel, the island of Cozumel, last year. And this year,
we are going to
Punta Cana, Dominican Republic.
That's right. Yes.
One of the most beautiful places in the Caribbean. They say they're known for their beautiful sandy beaches and their turquoise water. And the resort we have picked out for our getaway, you're going to love it.
When we looked on TripAdvisor, this place has 12,000 5-star reviews. I don't know how that happens, other than it must be completely awesome.
Yeah. Well,
and we know some people who have gone there. So
yeah, we know people who've gone there, and we've talked to travel agents who put it in their travel agent circle, and they're like, this place is awesome.
That's
and they
right.
really take care of you, and it's a great event. And we also are, so it's going to be during February 8th to February 12th, 2024. So you had so it's a little bit ahead of the game, but we are limiting the number of couples that can come. So if you're interested, you need to go to CatholicCouplesGetaway.com now.
CatholicCouplesGetaway.com.
Yeah. And we also have another special announcement. After we came back from Cozumel, got a call from a good friend, Chris Stefanik, who said, I've heard nothing but great things about your getaway. Natalie and I want to come next time. So they are joining us. They're going to be co-hosts with us on the February getaway, which I'm really excited about. But I think as this podcast is released, Chris is sending it out to his email list.
Yeah.
And he's got a
bigger email list than we do.
So if you are interested, the spaces will fill up. 100% guarantee they will fill.
And what is neat about this event with Chris and Natalie is that Chris is used to doing like huge, like, Billy Graham style, like rallies. This is not going to be thousands of people. This isn't even going to be hundreds of people. This is going to be a smaller group where you can spend time with us. You can spend time with Chris and Natalie. They're going to do talks. We're going to do talks. We give you tools for your relationship. But most important, lots of time to relax and to rest and to be rejuvenated. And you can spend time with your spouse. You can spend time with other couples. Everybody's different. Some people would rather be alone. There's time for that. Some people would rather hang out with other couples on the beach. There's time for that too. So there is whatever you would like to do. There is a place for you.
Yeah. And there'll be, mass spiritual direction, mentoring. There'll be tons and tons of stuff.
Yeah.
The optional stuff, right? For you to participate in that we're going to invite you into. But talking to the couples who went this last time, they talked about how they wanted to come because they wanted a good getaway. And it was a good excuse. But almost to every single couple, they said, my marriage is stronger.
Absolutely.
And they said, some of them came in a little challenged and they felt refreshed. Others were like, I thought we were at a good place. But he said, I had forgotten how good it was to be married to this woman, and be married and working on this family thing together. And then talking to couples, even a month or two afterwards, they were saying, I had the strength I needed to get back into family life.
Absolutely.
And I needed that break. For some of you, you may go on a getaway every year, but very few of us do. And this might be a great excuse as an anniversary, a special occasion. Mm-hmm. When's the last time you went away and invested in your marriage?
And you know what? Even about those couples who do get away together, this is different. We're calling it a getaway very specifically. It's not a vacation. And it's not a retreat. Right. Okay.
Somewhere in between there.
Yeah. Because some people go away, but maybe you don't really take that time to reconnect deeply on an emotional level.
Right.
Maybe you just kind of use that time just to escape a little bit, which, there's kind of nothing wrong with that per se. But this is different because we'll be giving you a workbook, some tools that you can use to kind of like have those deeper conversations. So you don't just go back to like, let's just go sit on the beach and watch Netflix, or, let's just watch reruns of The Office. No, this will give you some tools, some excuses to have some really deep conversations because guys, we've been married 30 years. There's always more.
Almost 30.
Almost 30 years. There's always more. You can always go deeper in your relationship. You can always learn more about your spouse. I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
And so really that's what this is to give you those tools and that inspiration to do more with your spouse than simply get away. But we also have enough. As a matter of fact, we are not changing the schedule at all because we had such positive comments.
People were like, there was enough that I felt like I was fed, but it also gave me enough freedom to go and do our thing. People went off on a horseback riding thing. Some people went hiking. Some people just walked on the beach. Some people just sat on some people did scuba. Some people just sat on the beach and read a book and they swam in the water, did whatever. I mean, we're going to give you enough where you're going to feel filled up both spiritually and in your marriage and for family life, but also enough place just to be. just to relax and, do what's right for you.
So go sign up now because, hey, our last time that we did this, it was filled up pretty quick.
I hated saying no to people.
And so now, especially with Chris and Natalie pushing it out to their list, jump on it, CatholicCouplesGetaway.com. And there's an early bird. Right?
There's an early bird until the end of June. So you get $200 discount if you sign up before June 30th.
Right.
And it will fill up. And also, if those dates or this occasion doesn't work for you, sign up on the list so next time because we will be announcing another one before we finish next year. All right, so let's get into today's topic. All right,
we're 10 minutes in. So this is, all right, I just want to say one thing before we start. This is one of Mike's strengths, is this whole idea of StrengthsFinder is something that he has been coached in and he's taken courses in and learned about. And I have done nothing of those things. So this is going to be more of Mike's. I'm going to be asking questions and going deeper. And I mean, some of the concepts that we're going to talk about are things I've seen lived out. But I think the whole idea. If
this podcast stinks, you're putting all the blame on me. Okay, I got you.
So,
and as you notice, I don't have any notes in front of me. I don't.
Well, I'm like, I blew it up so you can see a little bit.
I can't see it.
Okay, so yeah.
All right, so let's just start with this. Okay, so the idea of strengths.
Right. What are we talking about here?
And there are a lot of different assessments out there, or different tools that help you understand yourself better. I'm a big fan of StrengthsFinder. It's an assessment that looks at the unique dispositions.
So that's like a website or something that you StrengthsFinder?
It's an assessment, StrengthsFinder.
Kind of like you would say
Gallup.
like Myers-Briggs.
Yeah,
or,
it's different than a personality.
Okay.
In that it shows what are the natural talents you have, so that they could be developed into a strength.
Can you just give me like is this like talents meaning like ballet, dance, baking, or what do you mean by talents?
So for some people, it's I'll give you a couple of examples.
Yeah, just give me a couple examples.
So strategic, meaning you think strategically, you look at things and you're naturally disposed to that. Or you're a learner, meaning you approach a situation and you're like, I want to learn more about this, right? I want to go deeper. You have a woo. You have an ability to woo everybody, that you win people over. Like there's just a charisma about you.
Wouldn't that be wapu? Win people over? No. Okay. No, you mean woo, like wooing, like a bride or something like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then there are others that are more towards the executing, some that are more towards relationships. There's some more towards the ideation. There's different categories of all of these. So
they're more general than what we would normally think of as like talents, as in like a talent show.
Right. But they're naturally gifted to you, right?
Right. Okay.
You're disposed to them. But that doesn't mean everyone cultivates them equally, right?
Sure, of course.
And with knowledge and experience, you then turn them into a strength.
And that's really what coaching and things like that, like StrengthsFinder coaching, is to help people to lean into their gifts.
That's right.
And because it's much better to lean into your gifts and to focus on or to navigate your life in a way where you're doing things that you're really good at, as opposed to what some people do is they focus on their weaknesses, right? And then they try like, oh, I'm weak in this area, so I need to get better. And it's like, well, if it was a vice, I would say yes, but we're talking about strengths.
Right, because they did a ton of research on this, right? And
they meaning Gallup,
Gallup, right? And the Clifton and others, the researchers, right? These are social science. They've done this over millions and millions of people now, right?
That's so crazy.
And so they have all the data from this. And what they've found as they kind of looked at all these high-performing individuals, these people who are exceptional and as an artist, as a musician, as a business leader, as a scientist, all these different, even athletics, all these different areas. And they looked and they said, what really made these guys exceptional? And they found over and over again, they wasted almost no time on their weaknesses, but leaned in heavily into their strengths. And it's just a powerful, simple, tool, if you will, of approaching life. But then they also looked at inner city kids, and they said kids who are brought up and like, okay, is this based upon simply because not all those high performing individuals were, came from wealthy backgrounds or even there were challenges throughout, right?
Mhm.
Then looked at inner city kids, and they said, okay, here's some poor kids. What makes some kids thrive?
Yeah.
And they found 92% of all these high performing kids had parents who invested in their strengths, loved them, treated them well, but invested in their natural abilities. And they did a lot more than just that. And we'll go into that more, but they're seeing this across a number of areas where when you focus in on what you're naturally oriented towards, it thrives. And I think back to the interview we did with Sister John Paul. And she talked about growing in virtue.
Yeah.
And when we asked her, I said, well, we have always kind of thought, well, when you have a virtue even, because you talk about virtue and vice, when you see a virtue or you see a weakness, do I want to just say, hey, I'm going to focus on the positive corollary to that vice and say, okay, if our kids are lacking in discipline, if
they're very stingy, then let's focus on generosity.
Right. And she said, I wouldn't start there.
And we were like, oh.
That's not what I was expecting from a Catholic religious nun, right? And she said, I would look to what they're naturally gifted towards. And she said, look where your child is already oriented towards being loving in this way, caring in this way,
self-control in this way, discipline or whatever, generosity.
And what it made me think about, just kind of as an overarching picture, is that we want to look at our kids and say, and ourselves and say, you are designed good. You are designed with purpose.
Yeah.
You are designed with intentionality. And there's something good in you that I want to draw out. Because if we're simply trying to throw things into our kids, and even for ourselves, right? Well, we're taking what's not necessarily there and trying to add things. Or are we trying to cultivate and bring out?
True, right.
And so I would
Can I just say one thing? I always think in the spring, I always think of gardening every time I'm like gardening outside, is that the easiest thing to do when you move into a new place is to cultivate what is already there.
That's right.
Okay, so whatever is already growing in your ground. Like, for example, there were these irises that were growing wild on the hillside. I just picked them up and I moved them closer to the house because they're already there. For me to buy irises, like bulbs at the store and bring them to my house,
right,
and to try to it takes more effort. It can be done.
Right. Costs money, takes time.
Right. It takes so much more effort to do that than to just cultivate what's already there.
And if you think about it, just the simple way you did with the irises, that if we look at it and say, all of us only have a certain amount of time,
yes, that's very true.
We've been thinking about this more recently because it's something you read about how with our our children from the day they're born, we have 18 summers to invest in them. That doesn't mean that we're not investing throughout the entire year, but that there's some quality time.
18 summers before they become an adult.
Right? That's not very long.
It's not.
And so if we look at it that way and say, how do I want to invest that time? Do I want to invest that time always harping on them? Again, we want kids to overcome vice in their life. We want them to manage their weaknesses, but we really want them to thrive.
Yeah.
We want them to be nurtured the way God created them.
Mm-hmm. And there's something about having the humility to say, you know what? I'm not really good at that. And so I need help in this area. And I think we all, first of all, starting with ourselves,
That's right?
We all need to know that, you know what? I'm just not really good at being disciplined. And so I always, if I'm going to start a new habit, I need accountability. I need an accountability partner. There is nothing wrong with being aware of our weaknesses. It is so good to be aware of our weaknesses.
It's necessary.
And to ask for help and just to know yourself, or even just, I remember in one of your jobs when you were looking for a second, like for somebody to work underneath you. And you knew, I think you had just gotten through this.
Yes.
And you were like, I know these parts of my job or these parts I am weak in.
That's right.
So I need to find somebody, I need to hire somebody who is strong in these areas.
and when I hired Mark, he had the tenacity, he had the detail, he had the operations, he had that down.
Keep the trains running on time kind of person.
He was great in that. And you're totally right. And that doesn't mean for a second there that just, oh, well, this is who I am, so accept me. That's not what we're talking about here. Right. Meaning I'm a sinful SOB, I'm just selfish. That's who no, we're not talking about that.
I'm short-tempered or I'm undisciplined.
I have anger issues. No. You got to work on that. Okay. But what we are saying is that as you look at the equation, both for yourself and your kids, when you look at the investment of time, you want to spend more time investing more deeply into those strengths, in those areas where you have natural God-given talent for your full flourishing. And almost every time that I see this, kind of develop, you do minimize those weaknesses. You are able to look at that.
I was thinking of a great example of why to focus on strengths is thinking about a child. If you have a child who is very disciplined, but has a lot of gets up at a certain time, does certain things, but they are very weak in, say, kindness, that it's harder for them to be aware of the needs of others. You focus on that strength, right? You look at that strength and you say, okay, we're going to help you be more kind. So every day, let's make a discipline of every day do one thing nice for your mom or for, whatever, right. For this person. So you're taking that strength of discipline, affirming that and saying, okay, we're going to use that to scaffold being kind to others. Or generosity. You have somebody who, is difficult with just use the discipline thing again. And they have a difficult time being generous. That's why maybe tithing very strictly is a good thing for them.
Right.
Because that kind of forces them to have that generosity.
Right. Right. Because we all have to, and again, I don't
say forces, that builds upon that.
No, but we all have as individuals and as parents and with our children, we need to learn how to manage our weaknesses. Right. Some of those are vices, but some of those are just human weaknesses. But we need to give ourselves the grace to understand we can't be and we shouldn't be great or strong in every area. And I think there's a fallacy in our world where people want to be the jack of all trades. Now, there's nothing wrong with that per se, but just because—
It's not realistic.
It's not realistic, but then it's like, well, wait, so your idea is that you don't want, what do they say? The jack of all trades, master of none, right? Well, why not be unique? Why not be you?
Yeah.
And you have a certain unique way of approaching things that is different than somebody else. And when you get to that idea, you can say, well, if I was in a workplace, and this is true in a family as well, but if everybody was modestly good at everything, it'd be pretty boring. And I'd be like, well,
that's so true.
And not only would it be boring, it'd be like, we're actually not going to excel at anything. We're just going to be mediocre for the rest of our lives.
Right.
And God didn't make us for mediocrity.
Yeah.
We're called to aspire to greatness for the glory of God. But that's what it's oriented towards. Right.
All right. So question for you. Is there anything else you want to say about it?
I have lots more to say.
Okay. All right. So the whole idea, I think everybody's gotten the idea of knowing your strengths and knowing your child's strengths, right, is really important.
Right.
Before I move on to the next question I had for you is, how would you suggest someone finding their child's strengths?
So there's some natural things that we should look at, right? So as a parent, we are to observe our child, right? And so we're supposed to be that student of our child and looking at them with that inquisitive mind.
Change your own mindset.
Right. First, start with the idea that because I think as parents, we get caught up so much in seeing negatives. Our world teaches us that.
Like that dad at the dad's course who said to you, he was like, every time I see my son, I realize all I think of is the way he's failed.
Yeah. And if that's the way we see our kids, because we're like, I expect them to be here. I want them to be here. Because we have aspirations. We have expectations. We have, and not necessarily wrong, but do we communicate out of that expectation as opposed to looking for the gold that's already there in their lives? And so first, change your attitude and recognize this is different than strengths, but we just talked about it the other night when we were out. When I learned a particular child who was totally annoying me, when I read Nurture by Nature and discovered her Myers-Briggs personality, I realized that part of her being very strict with principles and kind of unwielding when justice was violated, all these different things that came into it. I'm like, okay, that's why she's arguing with me. Okay, this is a natural disposition of her personality.
Right, because we looked up her Myers-Briggs, and she was an INTP, and literally reading the description of an INTP personality was somebody who can be very easygoing and amenable until their principles are violated.
And then they become critical and they become, you know.
And they also can find different ways to get around things, because they are very principled.
And they're also probing for understanding by being that inquisitive, which for me was nothing but pure agony and annoyance.
Right. So to you, it felt like disrespect. But after recognizing, hey, this is her personality, you're like, oh my gosh, she's a creative problem solver.
Yeah. And it really did change my perspective on her.
Yeah.
And and for all of us, it's thought, action. The thought begins an action that then begins a habit, right? And so it changed the way I began to look at her. And so, but that's the idea, right? So the first thing is to look for the goodness,
right?
That's actually there, and
maybe even take notes or something. Write it down. Have a note on your phone or something, right?
I needed to, and it oftentimes is little pieces of information you might get.
So that's the thing, is that's why I think that note taking is important, because sometimes you don't just have one strength, right? Right. You have it's like a priority order or whatever. Right. And so, you can start writing down, and maybe it's like all different little things that you're noticing.
And then look for areas where they show natural ability, right? So there's something that's already coming, and for little guys, it's different, right? So it might be like, okay, like our youngest right now is all into baking. She's 10 years old. If she had a free time, she's going to probably be trying to bake something, make something,
making a mess in the kitchen, driving everyone
making
insane.
Homemade slime or baking brownies. Hopefully those two don't mix too often, right? But looking at her creative abilities, I'm like, there is something here that she likes putting things together. Not necessarily taking things apart, but adding ingredients, following instructions, and then making her own way.
Yeah.
She likes researching. She
does like researching. That's very true.
And so looking at that research ability, right?
Like that learner, maybe.
Yeah. And so I'm like,
so you're figuring her out right now as we're talking.
And it's like, but you look for those things, and you take notice of those natural abilities, things that she's drawn to, and those activities that she thrives in, that she really enjoys. Times where you look at her and she's like timeless. Like she's doesn't realize that, I just spent 3 hours.
That's so true.
Doing blank.
Yeah, making a mess in the kitchen.
And it isn't the baking per se, right? But it's what goes into that type of baking.
Exactly.
That you're like, okay, there's something
because
there.
It's not only baking, because she was making slime for the longest time.
Right.
So it's not just the food aspect of it. It's the creating. We bought her these like test tubes, and she would be mixing all kinds of things, and the teenage boys would get so frustrated with her. So you're right. It's not really the baking. It's just the putting things together. What's going to happen? How about this? How about that?
And so being attentive to those kind of things. So seeing those, recognizing those, and maybe writing them down. But then also talking to your spouse, because you have two different perspectives coming to that child.
Right.
And I think that's important.
Even scheduling time. We're going to talk about this child. Put your kids in priority order. The child who you're having the most difficult time with at this point, on down, and then just take that time to, hey, let's talk about this child as an individual.
And we encourage that during a family board meeting, right? Where you're always looking at least on an annual basis. Another thing is just what do you hear from the teacher at school?
Yes. Very helpful.
Are they distracted in class? Well, okay. That might be a negative from the teacher's perspective.
What distracts them?
But what's distracting them? What's boring them?
Yeah.
Are they pent up? They need activity. They need energy. They need to be challenged in a different way. Looking at all those things.
I remember just having a conversation with a friend of mine who was in college, and there was like somebody in her life who was in desperate need of help or something like that.
Yeah.
And so instead of studying for a test, she went and just was present to that person. And when she went to her professor and talked to her professor about it afterwards, her professor was like, because I think she wound up getting she's really, really smart. She's like 3 master's degrees or something like that now. But in this particular class, the professor was like, she did poorly on the exam, whatever. She wound up getting a B in the class instead of an A.
Oh my gosh.
The professors asked her, would you have done that again? looking back, knowing that you would fail that exam because helping this person, would you do it again? And my friend was like, absolutely. And the professor was like, well, then you should never get a doctoral degree because you have to be completely focused on this. Now, whether or not that's true,
right.
But it was good. She recognized, you know what? Her strength was working with people, you know, and almost every job she's had since then is some kind of like, almost like therapist, counselor, you know, teacher, working with people. That's her strength.
Yes.
You know, and even though she was good at academics and she was good at research, that wasn't really what really brought her life.
Right.
You know what I mean?
And
it was that personal connection. And so she had the degrees that she needed to do that. And that's what she decided to lean into. You know, I was thinking about that.
And when people look at their strengths, they often don't think of them as strengths. And
she's like, oh, everybody's like this.
Two parts. One is that, oh, well, it's just normal. Can everybody do that? No, they can't. You know, like right. Mike with his artistic and creative abilities.
They think it's no big deal, you know, because
but it's their natural gifting in that.
Right. So it's normal to them.
But then there's another aspect that some people don't always look at their gifts with a positive attitude.
That's so true.
There are, so over the years, I've mentored and coached a number of individuals who, when we've brought out their strengths, using the Strengths Finder as an assessment to have a conversation, I've had a number of people say, yeah, but isn't that negative? One example was the competitiveness as a strength, right? Mm-hmm. And they were like, well, but as a Christian, I'm not supposed to be competitive. And I'm like, what are you talking about? and they saw, and so we unpacked what that meant and right. how it needs to be seen in a virtuous and true light.
God never makes anything bad.
That's right.
God makes all things that are good.
And it's not like because God doesn't give us anything that's going to lead us in the wrong direction. God doesn't make junk. But it's also doesn't mean that just by having that strength we're naturally virtuous. There's always a dark side to anything we have, any gift we're given. But I think it's important for us as parents when our kids are young to recognize those natural abilities, because what you want to be able to do is call it out. And I mentioned this earlier, but you're calling out the gold in their life. Yeah. And when you can say, this is what, you know, like we do at birthdays, you know, that we honor somebody and we honor them usually for an attribute, characteristic, but as they get older, we try to recognize these are things that you have actually put your time and energy into, right? Mm-hmm. And that you have made an effort.
You've developed.
But we always try to call out, you are naturally gifted in this and you're leaning into it.
Yeah.
And because our kids need to know, you know, the identity, belonging, and mission is what we always talk about. Mm-hmm. And they need to know that they are loved, that they are beloved. And how do they know that? That I am special. Mm-hmm.
They need to know who they are. They need to know themselves. Yeah. And when you call out those gifts, then they know better. They may not, because like we were saying before, to them, acting like this is normal because it's like a fish in water, right? But they have to recognize, you know what, sweetie, not everyone is like this. That's a gift that you have. And so that's part of them forming their own identity of who am I, you know? And then that belonging, actually, this kind of goes right into our next point that we wanted to make, which is the power of environment.
Yes.
And I really think that belonging is really that environment. How are you as a parent creating an environment for the full flourishing of that child?
That's one of the goals of the family.
Right, exactly. It's part of your family culture. But the environment, I think that also gives a sense of belonging, of like, I can stretch my legs here. And as opposed to everything I do is no, don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Then you don't feel like you belong. But if you're living in an environment where you're like, these are my gifts and I'm allowed to explore those gifts, right? I'm allowed to kind of like stretch, if you will, you know, and kind of like move around. I think about we have 2 dogs who are constantly getting out of the house. If you're our neighbor listening to this, I'm so sorry. But our neighbors are so kind and so good to us. And our dogs are fine. They're not hurting anybody, but they just love to run.
That's right. They were born to run.
They were born to run. The golden retriever usually comes back right away, but the lab, she's like, she gone. Now we do have a lot of open area in the back, so she runs around there. But my point is that that's what it makes me think of is like when you're living in an environment where you can exercise your strengths, it's like you're just born to run.
It's like when you are able to line up, and again, just kind of at the end of our journey, that of parenting, that our kids are launched off. The hope is that they have a deep sense of who they are and that they have been designed and fearfully and wonderfully made, that they know that they belong both with us, but they have a place in this world.
That's according to their strengths, right? This is my contribution to the world.
And then the mission is that I know that I have gifts and my gifts are meant to serve, to give, others. To go out and be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so it's like the be, do, go, right? It's who I am, it's what I do, and it's where I go to serve, right? And so getting to a deeper love for our child, to call out the gold that we see in their lives so they know as young an age as we can that you were awesome. You are awesome.
Yeah.
The gifts you have are needed and important to this family so that when they go out as an adolescent in the teen years, they're in high school, they're like, it's going to be awkward. There's going to be transitions, but the more that they know, both that they are loved, but that they have something to share, that they have a unique thing they can walk into. And in those adolescent years, those teen years is when you really want to lean into that so that they can see and have those conversations. I think before that, it's probably more of you on your own, blessing them, if you will,
Absolutely.
by your words and the way you're calling them out. But in those teen years, that's when you want to be both through assessments and conversations, helping them reflect on who they are so that they can start beginning sharing their self, their unique gifts and strengths with the world.
Because really before the age of 12, the home, the family, they're kind of like, they're gathering strength.
That's right.
Like from that. And that
they're in the Shire.
Exactly. That's very true. They're gathering that strength and really they're learning who they are in relation to themselves, which is by extension, their family. But really, after that age of 12, from 12 to 18, really from 12 to, I guess it's 24, from 12 to 24, who am I in relation to the world?
Yeah.
First, it's to others, but then to the world. Where do I fit in the world?
That's right. They have to answer those questions.
Yeah. And so that's why your affirmation of them in some ways is not enough.
It can't be, but it has to be enough, or it is enough when they're young, younger, right? The 0 to 12 time frame, it is almost entirely dependent upon you, your home life. And your home life then gives that foundation, like you said, for them to go out and understand who they are in relation to others and the world.
And see, that's the one area that I see that some Catholic parents can kind of get tripped up when you're not living in a community of other adults who can affirm your child and confirm their gifts, because then those kids never really they're going to have a harder time living in the world of adults when they are 18 going off to college or when they just kind of make their way in the world. You really have to, that is your time to gather other adults, whether it's coaches or teachers or
youth ministers or just community friends in the community or ideally extended family, right?
Yeah. And if you are a homeschooler, it kind of presents a special challenge, because if you're, they aren't naturally relating with teachers and coaches, but to make sure that you have a community of people, because that is just so important. I really think that looking at both of us, we were very blessed in our teenage years to have parents who put us in contact with other well-formed adults who affirmed our giftedness.
Yes.
And really helped set us on that path. And so when we got to college, people would tell us all the time, you guys seem so much older than you are. Like you just seem to kind of—
Because we always related up. We always played up.
Exactly. And I never really kind of thought about— I always thought about how that was such a gift, but I never thought about it in terms of strengths and relating with the world.
Yes.
Is that I literally had people who were in their 20s calling out my gifts.
Yeah. I remember that in high school and in early 20s, having people say, hey, you should come up and do this talk.
Yeah.
Oh, hey, can you lead this, event?
Right.
Can you speak at this? I'm like, who am I? I don't. And there were other adults that were in my life or college age and up, right?
Yeah. I think those are adults.
Well,
the older we get, the younger those college students are.
I'm like, why did I listen to them? But those people did, like you said, and that's the natural. I think that's the natural pattern.
Yeah.
Is that your family is and always will be essential in the life of a child, right?
Of course.
The parents, obviously, particularly, but ultimately, we need a tribe.
That's right.
And in the beautiful design of God, that's maybe for you, your extended family. Maybe you have that, but maybe you don't have that. A lot of people don't. We don't have extended family around us, except our own kids.
We're creating our own extended family.
We're building it right here. But we had friends, and we had friends who were family friends that were mentors to our kids, as well as the long distance to our uncles and aunts and so forth.
Yeah.
And but that sort of tribeness is needed as they transition, because when they get to a place, and we've talked about the kind of the growing up weekend and then the initiation that I've had, but when a uncle, who my sons look up to, calls out and affirms them in front of other men, this is what I see in you. And then when they are challenged by those same uncles and grandpa to live up to a higher calling, a higher level of discipline.
Yeah.
That matters.
So
if you have younger kids, think about this now, because when there is a lot that is in your scope that you have a huge capacity to fill up for your kids. But think down the road. If your kids are in the 9 to 12 year span, we call those the golden years, right? And it's not just for the talk. It's not just for the growing up conversation, but it's also for getting ready to build a community around your son and daughter, where they can have other adults that you can say, I want these people to be trusted, respected guides and mentors for my kids as well as myself.
So the other reason for community that I was thinking about is that if your child has strengths and you don't know how to develop them, because they're seen kind of foreign to you, like the competitiveness. Okay, say in your family you're just not a really competitive family. My family of origin, the Domans, are so competitive. And the Hernans, many of the Hernans are not competitive. We would always joke when we were playing games and kids would get upset. They would be like, we're not competitive. Remember, we're not competitive. But anyway, but seriously, looking at that competitiveness as a strength, and say like your family is just more easygoing and you're like, oh, this child, how do I make this child feel like that competitiveness is not wrong, but that it's a strength? Right. And that's why I think where community comes in, where you gather other people, and that's where like athletics and those kinds of things, to recognize that, you know what, you're different,
that's
son,
really
you're different than me.
Excellent point.
But I love that, that you're like that.
And I'll take a half a step back from that. When we talked about the whole jack of all trades, and people want to be, I want to be well-rounded. As an individual, I don't believe we're called to be well-rounded. But as a couple, as a mom and a dad, we are more well-rounded, and therefore we can approach our kids hopefully with a wider perspective, because you have strengths that I don't have. I have strengths that you don't have. Right. And so we have one more perspective, but we also are other, and therefore we can see, okay, well, this child's another because I can respect your strengths. So particularly for single parents, I just to recognize that calling out those gifts in your kids is still important, but you do need help because one, you're only seeing it from your perspective. You help me see from a second vantage point. You need help to recognize and call that out in your kids. We all need help. But for those who are single parents, you have a lot of challenges. You've got to get over, hopefully you have already kind of your own pride of not asking for help. You need help. In this, in that you look for others who can help see things that maybe you can't, as well as just facilitate and acknowledge the gold in your child to draw that out in a real way. But we, going back to the environment again, the family culture that we always talk about is kind of it's the ecosystem in your home. It's
That's
that
right.
it's that
The
operating system, right? And
if you like computers, it's the operating system. If you like nature, it's the ecosystem.
right. I'm going to stay with ecosystem for the moment,
Okay.
right? Because it's something that's growing,
right.
and it has a life of its own,
right?
But there is a priority of order, and I'll just go through real quickly, right? First is the spiritual life of the home. The second is your marriage being the foundational relationship in the home. Third being the formation of relationships in the home, siblings, as well as mom, dad, parent, all of those together. And then is the developing of the unique giftedness of each individual, which is really what we're talking about here.
That's right.
Followed by operations. And they are in priority order. And the reason, I don't think we said this yet, is that the world too often looks at creating high-performing kids is the number one objective of parents. And it is not. Is the full flourishing of the individual part of it? Absolutely. But it needs to have the spiritual life, the marriage, the relationships of the home, so that when you do develop those gifts, when you call out those gifts, which we are required to do, I believe, it's in the context of service. It's in the context of relationship. In the context of there is a center fixed point of the marriage in the home, of the foundation of the whole home being our faith, right?
Yeah.
And so understanding where that fits in your family culture is important so that you can create an environment. And I'd say the environment you're creating really is the culture of your home.
Yeah.
How are you honoring people's gifts? How are you calling out those gifts? Are you, one, recognizing that first, before they do anything right, wrong, or good, bad, strength, weakness, that they are simply loved, that they are delighted in, that they are affirmed just for being your son or daughter. And out of that solid relationship, out of that solid sense of their understanding of who they are, at the core of their being, they are good and they are loved.
Right.
Out of that, then you bring the strengths.
And I think that when we get those mixed up, then kids can begin to think the only reason they're loved is because of their gifts.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Or only because I performed well on this test, or I did my chores.
Right.
And
because I'm disciplined, I'm loved. Because I'm competitive, I'm loved. Because I'm kind, I'm loved. No. You're loved just because you're you. Because you're my son or daughter, and that really comes from, first of all, that knowledge of God's presence in your home, and that this world is not all there is.
Yes.
It's not just about this mortal coil, where we are, like this, we're operating on a divine landscape.
Yes.
That's really what we're doing. And we have to recognize that. And then also that your marriage, that's the guard, reveal, and communicate love. Because when your marriage is strong, you are sending that message to your children that love is the foundation of this home.
That's right.
Right. And then that love flows out into the relationships with your brothers and sisters. So when it's time for somebody's first communion and your, state football, whoever made it to the championships, what are you going to do? Where is your loyalty? Are you going to say, oh, no, developing these gifts is more important, or no, being with our family for this important event is more important.
And that's why understanding your family culture is so vital. If you get these things in right order, you see them breathing life into each other as opposed to one pulling away. And so if you understand that your job isn't to make the best athlete or this or that, or even school, as important as all these things are, and they're all important in some level, or not equally important, but they're all important. But if you get this right and say, I am called by God to develop their giftedness so that they can give themselves away.
I just thought of a good example too. We had a situation in the past with one of our children where we had a coach who was practicing, not games, because we've had games on Sundays, but who was practicing on Sundays.
Right.
And we literally called the coach and was like, no bueno.
Yeah.
Our son will, if you want to practice on Sundays, obviously can do that. That's, your job, your decision, but our son will not attend practices on Sundays.
And I remember talking to him and then the principal later, and I said, I don't believe this is in the best interest of the team that they do this.
That's
and I
right.
said, one, my son won't be there, so he better not be penalized.
Right.
But two, I don't believe it's the best interest of the students.
And why?
Because
of that family culture.
That's right.
Right?
And I told him that. And he's like, hey, I get it. And he was Christian and he got it. And he was like,
Right.
that's why I try to make it after church and late in the day. And I'm like, it's still Sunday.
Yeah.
Still Sunday.
Because our time
and
as
we
a family.
we created a family culture that actually had Sunday family dinners. So all the married kids and everybody came over. It wasn't just we try to do it every Sunday because we don't because sometimes we're traveling or somebody's sick. Doesn't happen every single week because of unforeseen circumstances. So we try to protect them. And there's never going to be a place where someone's athletics, particularly a practice, a game or a state meet, when it's out of our control, we
like
made
our son right now
to that.
has like soccer games on Sundays, but it's just a period of time, whatever, we can get over that. But practices that are unnecessary, because I'm like, we can't change the whole league.
Right. We can't have them all revolve around us.
Exactly. Hey, before we close up, you had mentioned something when we were getting ready to start recording this about blessings and the importance of that. What's that all about?
Well, so I kind of mentioned a little bit already, but the idea that as a parent, particularly a father, but mother and father, we are called to bless our children. And when
do you mean like, before they go to bed, bless them, or what do you mean by bless them?
And so by bless them, I mean see them with God's eyes. Speak the words that God would speak over them, so that they can know they're a beloved son or daughter, that they are that they were fearfully and wonderfully made. That they have goodness and it's for a purpose. Meaning, sometimes it might be a spiritual, actual blessing that you're putting your hand on your child.
Sometimes, like having those physical, a lot of times, those physical, actual, like little rituals, if you will, like small r ritual that we do in our home, they communicate, right? So that the act of, there's a lot of ways you can bless a child, right? So there's actually putting your hand on their head and just, doing the sign of the cross. And maybe you have something you say, right? But you mean more than that? I'm assuming.
A practice I would encourage parents to consider is taking time to pray. Go to maybe an adoration chapel and maybe do this once a year. Maybe do it right before their birthday. Might be a really beautiful way to do this, right? Where you sit in prayer and you ask for God to say, reveal my child to me.
Yeah.
Show me what you see in them.
Yeah.
And give me your words to speak over my child. Like when Christ came up, from the waters of the Jordan, and he this is my beloved son, in whom I'm well pleased.
Yeah.
It all starts with that.
Yeah.
But your child is unique. And so if you pray and you allow the Holy Spirit to speak God's words through you, so you have this picture of what God sees your child as, ask your heart and your mind to be illuminated by the Holy Spirit. What does God see in my child? And maybe there's something unique. And say, I really see this. And it could be a literal prayer of blessing that you're praying over them. Or it could just be an affirmation and honoring that you do for them. And again, I really encourage them to do it on the birthday as a profound moment, or their date of their baptism, where they're calling out some unique gold that they see in their child, these natural abilities and talents, and then where they've applied expertise, knowledge, and experience, effort in, and call that out so that they can say, my dad sees me.
Yeah.
My mom knows me.
Yeah.
And they see me not only as good, but that I have something to bring to the table.
So there's an intentionality there. It's not just passively loving your child and thinking about them, but saying, I'm going to take this time to pray for them. I'm going to take this time to ask God to see my child with his eyes. And then I'm going to, because it's not enough to stop there, I'm going to communicate that to my child.
That's right.
That's part of that affirmation is not simply delighting in your child, but it's communicating that.
That's
and
right.
for you to figure out, how am I going to communicate that intentionally?
Right.
Maybe it's a letter on their birthday, every birthday. Maybe it's a nightly blessing. Maybe it's all of those things.
Right.
But to decide, how am I going to intentionally communicate that? And I feel like sometimes with dads especially, it's good to have a little ritual, to have a little form, if you will, that I will always say these words at this time, because then it's a little bit more comfortable and it's a habit and it feels a little bit less awkward maybe.
And not only is it's more likely to be done.
Yeah, that's the bottom line.
And
it's
because
true,
we all get busy, we all get distracted. So
true. Yeah.
Excuse me. Sorry for my voice today. But the idea of the family culture is making habits of the home.
Yes.
And then when you create that as part of your ecosystem or your operating system of the home, it takes less energy and effort. And then it's something that can be repeated for everyone. And so then the mark upon your kids becomes more indelible. They know who they are, their identity. They know where they belong, and they know what their mission is. And really, that's ultimately what we're talking about with strengths. Now, I'll just end with this idea: is strengths Strengths Finder is an assessment tool. There are others out there, right? But it is great in that it gives you an opportunity to focus in, and you start with the top 5 if you're interested in doing it. There is a Strengths Finder for kids. If they're really young, I would just recommend you just looking for things and you praising them when they're stretching.
Oh, you want to show up the book real quick?
Yeah. Well, and this is a
strengths-based parenting.
Strengths-based parenting. Yeah. So it's got some interesting ideas and lots of some stories and some examples and ways to kind of discover more. And then it breaks down each of the strengths for you and gives you ideas of how to spot that in your kids. Also, for those who are doing...
Oh yeah, I forgot about this.
Cana 90, in the 4th week of Easter, this was a area that we focused on. So we had a week that we focused on
during the Easter weeks in Cana 90. So the Lent, it was focused on the covenants, and in Easter, it's focused on your family culture. And so the 4th week of Easter is focused on activities and prayers to develop the giftedness of those people in your family. So 2 resources for you.
And so as you look at this, it's more important that you do something than you do the perfect thing. But
that is our motto.
That is for everything in life. But it is one of those things that we need to make sure we as parents are looking for this. And so whether your kids are very young, just start being inquisitive, and as they get into the, age of reason, early times, start maybe taking a note or two. When they're in the 9 to 12, you really want to start drawing it out. But whether they're teens or young adults, we've said this before, but teenagers love talking about themselves. This is a time when you want to do that, because I remember looking back at a family board meeting where he said, I'm going to sit down with each of the kids and we're going to go through some assessments and we're going to talk about them and their giftedness, because I want them to begin as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old, talking about their vocation, not just their state in life, but how are they going to serve in the world?
That's right.
As well as...
which may lead them to a religious vocation or a lay vocation.
And so all of that is part of what it means to be a parent. And
very good.
And strengths goes for us too, Strengths helps us recognize how we complement each other as opposed to critique each other and challenge each other. So anyway.
Do you want to end with the prayer?
Let's pray.
Okay.
All right. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, you are the giver of all gifts. All good gifts come from you. We acknowledge that you have made us as mom and dad in a unique and wonderful way. Lord, may you overcome any past doubts or concerns or feelings of failure. Lord, give us a fixed hope in our future, something that is brighter than any of the weaknesses we've ever experienced. And help us see what you see in our kids. Let us see with your eyes. May we see not just their weaknesses and their failings. May we see the talents, the gifts, the strengths that you have imprinted on their very hearts, their very bodies, Lord, that they would be called out and that we could be instruments of your words and your blessing to our kids. In your name we pray. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Again, if you want to find out more about the Play and Pray Challenge, go to messyfamilyproject.org. You want to find out about the getaway, go to CatholicCouplesGetaway.com.
Yes.
And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you.
change.